Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast. It is day 99 of our devoted series. We have been journeying through the entire Bible this year, started in Genesis, now are in 2 Kings, and I'm so excited to have you with us again as we continue through the Bible and continue to share our thoughts. This week, again, I am joined by my wife, Victoria, who is here with us, and we picked up at 1 Kings, actually, is where we are today. We will finish the 2 Kings by the end of this week. But left off at 1 Kings 4, and we'll start at 1 Kings 5 here in a moment. But just before we do that, as we do each week, want to start off kind of with a question that gets our week started, just thinking about the Bible in a sense. And in honor of day 100 being tomorrow, that we have done this podcast, completed officially 70 episodes since we get the weekends off. Yeah, just wanted to kind of think back. We have completed 10 books.
Yeah.
We've done 70 episodes. We've read a lot. What so far, if you could just pick out one thing, what has been the most interesting thing you've learned this time through the Bible?
1.5.
Sure.
It's so hard. We've gone through so much. So I'll make it quick though. So the first one is when we started doing Exodus and we started identifying the whole battle of the gods, and it keeps coming back up where God has been so intentional. I mean, from his commandments to how he went up against Egypt and each one of their gods and their plagues to even now his disgust with these kings that we'll see this week is most of it comes from the fact they've gone to other gods, right? And so there's this, for me, it just stuck out so much of how much God wants us all to himself. And it's let me be your provider. Let me be your everything that you need. And so as reading through this throughout the months, I've been okay, so God, show me what idols I've been putting before you. Show me what things that I go to first, because we can read it and be oh, why did he go to this thing and look for this thing for anything, or this idol for anything? But we do the same thing in our lives. And so for me, it was just this whole full, devotion to the Lord. Not my money, not my family, not my friends, not my counselors. Who do I put in front of God and make sure that I eliminate that? Because I know it just disgusts him. Sorry, not as quick as I thought this was going to be. He looking this ain't quick. But the second one is this theme of humility, of how much, even with that devotion to him, he just really loves a humble heart. And so we keep seeing this with Abraham, willing to do whatever for the Lord. And we see with David, or we saw with, before skipping to David, Moses, right? And how humble Moses was. And that is something that the Lord really honors. Even when they mess up, they still humbled themselves, and the Lord accepted them in a way that a Saul didn't, right? Because of the pride. And so I normally used to go to the New Testament to say, well, God, he exalts the humble and he, hates the proud. But I never realized how much I could see that in the characters of these people throughout the Old Testament. I'm done.
Okay. Good. I think for me, mine probably actually goes back to Exodus as well.
Okay.
And maybe technically it was probably more No, it was Exodus is where we kind of got it, and it was just one of my favorite things since we've done this podcast was just that um, realization, which I think this was the first time I kind of came across it.
Yeah.
That the Israelites learned in Egypt what it would take for them to build like the tabernacle of God, right?
Yeah.
Like they gained those skills from their time in Egypt, and just really you see that kind of time and time again that it's just like it's in certain difficult seasons that people learn the things that they'll ultimately need in their next season.
Yeah.
Right? Like even as we just finished the story of David, like you think of his battles with lions and bears helped him with Goliath, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that ability to use a slingshot he didn't just come up with that idea against Goliath.
Right.
Like, he was using that early on, and yeah, and just kind of seeing that, I think that's where it first opened my eyes to like those difficult seasons in our life,
Yeah.
the things that we pick up and learn, how they help us to ultimately conquer and do some things for the glory of God later on in life. So, yeah, I think that specific one was the one that just, again, I had never really given much thought to. And when that was brought up, you know, however long ago that was, we did Exodus, that's really ministered to me. So
That's good.
yeah,
Appreciate those moments in life.
yeah, absolutely. So, we'd love to know what's been most interesting for you as well. You've been through a lot of these episodes to this point, so if there's anything that you were just like, man, I didn't see that way, or I learned something different. Maybe it's not even something we discussed on the podcast, but it was just something else you found in your watching or reading, I should say. Please share that with us in either our VIBEZ Church app, in our chat group for VIBEZ Daily, or YouTube comments or Facebook comments, kind of wherever you may watch, and we'd love to hear that. But let's jump in. We have a lot of reading this week, and so we want to make sure we get through all of this. And so we pick up here at 1 Kings chapter 5. When we last left off, we really just kind of heard about Solomon and his wisdom. Just kind of, he had just asked for wisdom from the Lord. God gave it to him, and it kind of ends with just like, man, his reputation far exceeded, you know, the reach of Israel, right? Everybody knew of Solomon and his wisdom.
Yeah.
And so we kind of get into some of that here a little later, but we pick up here in chapter 5 with Solomon continuing to fulfill some of the things that his father desired and asked, right? So when we were in the first couple chapters of 1 Kings, he had kind of gone after some individuals that David told him to go after, right? Kind of killed some people that David told him to kill, whatever. He was just kind of fulfilling the steps of what his father David told him to do. But now he gets to kind of do something that his father dreamed of, which was to build the Lord's temple, to build his home specifically. So kind of covers the next couple chapters, 5, 6, and a little bit of 7, or in 7 as well. So most of today will kind of deal with the building of the temple. So yeah, we'll jump out. You don't necessarily have to do it chapter by chapter today, since it's kind of all one story. What jumped out to you as Solomon built God's temple?
Yeah. I think the first thing was in chapter 5, actually. I think it's like verse 3, where he's explaining that like his father couldn't build the Lord a house because of the warfare and because like all the enemies that he was still fighting. Like he was busy fighting.
Yeah.
And we mentioned before like the bloodshed on his hands, right? But he's like, well, now I have rest on all sides, like, and I also don't lack anything.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, wow, I don't think I've ever, and I might be reaching here, so maybe a stretch, but it seems like when the Lord has given us rest, it's opportunity to lean into him and to like do for him and to pour out for him, right? Like, and I just think about us in the busyness of our lives. Like, most of us are not fighting battles, but we fight our own battles that we brought upon ourselves, right? For sure. Or picking up things that are just overly committed, overly busy. And because of that, I just feel like we might not be able to do for the Lord the way that we are supposed to, because we don't have that rest that we need.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, I definitely noticed that as well. Just especially when we get into, I mean, it takes them a total of like 13 years, I believe, to build it all.
It took a long time.
Right. And so, when you keep in mind how often David was at war with someone, right? Ultimately, it became his own family at some point, right? Because his sons are trying to steal the throne. But like, Yeah, when you think about how often he was at war and at battle, um, it does make sense that he wouldn't have the time to sit down and build a temple. And so I do think it is a challenge, though, of like what we do with our idle time for sure.
Yeah.
Right. And not just times of rest, but times of peace, times of idleness. Right. And are we doing something for the glory of God in that time as well? But yeah, that's interesting. I think, love that he just kind of solicits Hiram here and his expertise, right? Find somebody that kind of has access to these great trees, or this cedar from Lebanon, right? And this partnership that they kind of build here to work together to kind of get the cedar from Lebanon that would help to build that temple. And so, they come up with kind of this agreement here, in working agreement, this contract to make that work. And Hiram, pulls it off, right? He does what he has to do on his part. And later on, we'll see kind of some of what Solomon gives Hiram's not super satisfied with. But in the meantime, they kind of had a good partnership there. Anything else that jumped out to you?
I love that this relationship, though, even between Solomon and Hiram was possible because of David, right?
Yeah.
Like, and how he was just peaceful with everyone that he could, like gracious towards everyone that he could. So I was just like, yeah, like we even got to watch our relationships, because it might trickle down, right, to our kids and those who come behind us in any capacity. But that was a lot of food.
Oh yeah, what he had to provide for Hiram's family.
Yeah, like, or even when it gets later on telling us how much food the Solomon's household used, I'm like, my goodness, they had lots of food and oils and stuff that they were using. But yeah, I think it was interesting, though. Just like he was just like, okay, cool. Because in my mind, I was hold on, King Hiram. Like, that's a lot, but seemed like he had the means.
Yeah, that was interesting, because this will come up a little bit later when we get to his sons. But Solomon does kind of have some forced laborers in Israel, right? That he solicits, right? 30,000 men, which is verse 13 tells us that he sent to help this. Now, he did give them kind of like a month on, 2 months off type of kind of rotation there. But yeah, I thought it was interesting that happened. It doesn't exactly feel like slavery, but it also feels like more like, I would imagine, kind of a military draft,
right?
The way we think of it today, right?
Yeah.
It's not like slavery; it's just more
an enlistment for sure.
Yeah, everybody's required to enlist if you are in this particular, demographic of people. But yeah, so it was very interesting to see that specifically as well.
Yeah, and what I was noticing, even just with the building of this temple, now with the tabernacle, the Lord gave so many instructions.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it was so detailed. And I was wondering if they used any of those details and stuff from the tabernacle to create this temple. But then he also, like, had a lot of stuff and used a lot of stuff that, like, the tabernacle didn't have. Like, the tabernacle had curtains, right? And so part of me was like, was this cedar and cypress and some of the stuff that they used, like, was this God inspired? Right? Like, this is what the Lord wants his temple to look like. Or was the Lord like, y'all made me the tabernacle just how I like it. The fact that you even want to build me a house is beyond. Yeah. I'm just going to honor and accept the gift, right? Yeah. So I was interested, because we see what they did. But previously, we had chapters of instructions on how to do it, and then chapters on what they did afterwards.
Yeah, there's a very clear distinction, right? Moses got clear instructions from God on how to build it, that Moses then translated and gave to those that he enlisted to build it. As you said, this is what it looked like. And so, yeah, I am curious how much of this was God inspired. You can tell there was still a regalness and a majesty to it, right? Like Solomon did not, cut any corners with the Lord, right? It wasn't cheap by any stretch of imagination. And we see that later, even when Queen Sheba comes to visit. It's just like, like, wow, this is the most amazing palace and land I've ever seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I thought it was interesting. He definitely did not cut any corners, but it's not clear whether these instructions were directly from the Lord. But I will say, like, one thing I learned, I don't know that I ever really realized that, like, Solomon's palace was, like, adjoined to the temple, which you kind of read in chapter 7.
I must miss that too.
Well, I ended up had to do some research
Okay.
because as he was building the palace, like, I was thinking to myself, but I thought you were already living somewhere, like, because King David kind of had a palace and stuff that he lived in, so I was kind of like, where were you living before? But then he talked about a lot of this was also this the treasury, the house of the cedars of Lebanon, right? I was trying to understand what were the point of these. Like, there was a lot of questions I had as I was reading it, so I ended up doing some research, and essentially they were joined to each other. So it was like the temple, and then right next to it was his palace, like his house, his wife's house, the one that was the daughter of Pharaoh in Egypt, and then that treasury of sorts, which was the house of the cedars of Lebanon. So it wasn't like a house full of trees. They named it that due to the fact that, like, a lot of it was built with those cedars, but it was essentially the treasury. That's where those gold shields were kept. That's where a lot of the, like, it was a treasury. So think about it. Weapons and treasures and stuff are kept there specifically. But yeah, it's all like one big industrial complex.
Got you.
Which I felt like was very interesting, that I don't think I'd ever really realized, but as I read it this time, for whatever reason, it just made me ask some questions. To see that.
Yeah, definitely didn't put those dots together. Yeah, I see this house of Lebanon on the forest in verse 2 of chapter 7 here that you're talking about. This hall of throne, this hall of judgment that they have. Yeah.
Which is why I think chapter 7 verse 1 tells us he completed his entire palace complex after 13 years of construction. So that was 7 years or so for the temple itself, and I think another 6 to get the rest of it, where it took 13 total for, like, all of it to be built.
Yeah. But like you said, they didn't cut any corners, though. That's for sure. Like, stuff was overlaid with gold. And he said it was the best of the best, stuff that was imported, like you just hadn't seen there before. That's one thing I do love about the Bible, is like, it's so accurate that it's kind of like, yeah, these cedars, like, we didn't even have cedar like this, like, where we lived. Like, we had to import this.
Absolutely.
Because just geographically in this region, cedars just don't grow there, right? And so I do love it. Like, so if we just went out to where this was, we probably see, like, it wasn't the land for the cedars. Like, Lebanon had that. So yeah, I love that. I always wondered what the cherubim actually looked like. I know we have, like, some thoughts, but, like, it seemed like to them it was so clear what these things were supposed to look like, right? So when they said the cherubim, I just wondered what they look like.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those biblical references that so much time has passed that it's really hard for me to not even just understand what it looks like, but understand why it was so, like, common knowledge and significant for, like, that group of people, right? Because, like, to build a cherub in the temple, there had to be a belief that there was a significance to this, right? To put this in the house of God. But, like, there's not much to this point. We don't have a whole lot of scripture that, like, talks about cherubim like they're, I mean, anything. Like, we don't even know, like, what the significance or purpose of them. It's not a whole lot of reference to it in scripture that gives us, like, oh yeah, this is what a cherubim is and why you should know them and why it's important to have them around God's, holy of holiest places. And, like, our only reference to it is actually what we've already read in here and for the tabernacle, right? It's just like, okay, we know that they're close to God.
Yeah.
Like, they put them close to God. Like,
God wants them close.
Yeah.
On earth and in heaven.
That's what we know. Like,
that's what we know.
Whatever they are and whatever they do, like, it's kind of unclear. So Yeah, that's one of those things that not even just what they really look like. I just really want to ask God, help me understand.
Mm-hmm.
Should I have had cherubims in my house that I didn't know? Like,
I think that's for the Lord, though. I think that's for the
okay. I mean, but I feel like I'm his sanctuary now. You know what I'm saying?
Lord.
Like,
Holy Spirit is indwelling
my
in this
body
place.
is his temple. That's what the scripture told me. So I need a cherubim tattoo somewhere.
That's not what that means.
That's what I just figured. You gotta put a
I
cherub.
can assure you that's.
With the wings stretched out across my back, you know,
Yep,
or
no.
across my chest. I didn't
Yeah.
have some of the back, so maybe
I was
across
about
the
to say your
chest,
back
put
is
the-
taken up.
Put the wings stretched like they had it in the Bible from.
I can see. Listen here, we
Just
always
from
trying
armpit
to.
armpit, just
We
wings.
can't urbanize the Lord all the time. Okay, all right.
I'm trying to translate the scriptures.
I don't think that's a translation. I don't know what that is.
I am the temple, this body,
Anyway.
and he has I don't know.
Anyway.
Stay tuned.
No, there's nothing to stay tuned for. We're not doing this. What are you talking about? Stay tuned. No, we're not.
All right.
But my next thought was.
Okay. What you got?
You a mess. You remember though when they did do the tabernacle and it was saying how like the Lord put his spirit in that guy. What was his name? I forget.
That built it?
But
It begins with a B.
B. It's a B. But anyways,
But keep going.
put his spirit on him and gave him the wisdom and the skill to do everything. And I think it was interesting that we got another guy here. And he was actually from Tyre. He's from the tribe of Naphtali though. His father was from Tyre though. And it says that in chapter 7 verse 13 or 14 that he was full of wisdom, understanding, and skill for making any work in bronze. And so he came to King Solomon and did all his work. And so for me that was like another like seeing the Lord equipping his people to do what needs to be done, you know. And just like how he equipped Solomon with all these materials and with the wealth and everything that they needed. I just love that these are not just the physical stuff was given back to the Lord for his temple and for his like glory, but it was also, you know, the skill. Because oftentimes you feel like we get this knowledge, or we're smart in certain type of way, or we're gifted in a certain type of way, and we use it for the world or ourselves, right?
Yeah.
But I just love how like he came to Solomon and he used that skill for his work for the of the Lord.
Yeah. It's good. It was Bazel.
I knew it.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's always good to kind of point those things out. Again, particularly in the context of, you know, a lot of what we learn in church is the spiritual gifts, right? Teaching and preaching and prophesying and healing. You know, those are great. That's amazing. But God also just equips us with talents and gifts that we can also use for his glory, right? We don't always have to be a prophet or an apostle to glorify God. We could be a doctor, a craftsman, an architect, whatever it is.
A musician.
Yeah, all sorts of things for the glory of the Lord. So good. Anything else in kind of the building of this, kind of going through chapter 7 here before we get to 8 as he dedicates it?
Not much. It was so hard because I just kind of was reading, and I you know, when you're reading these things, it's not sure what to take from all of it. It's like I'm just reading.
Yeah, I'm sure if we were a little bit more educated, we'd understand. I wouldn't say educated, but just more like understood some of the context or the inferences with some of the. I mean, like I understand why pomegranates, right?
Yeah.
I understand it's great fruit, but like why those?
Yeah.
You know. And so, you know, then maybe there would be a little bit more to glean from it. But I think with my limited cultural knowledge in that particular case, yeah, sometimes it's just like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
That, you know, that's what you used to build that, and that's what you made. Okay, cool. All right, I can see it. I can see it a little bit. I'm picturing the temple here.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's jump to 8 because after building the temple, Solomon dedicates it, and there's kind of this prayer. This call or this ask of the Lord, and eventually his response as well. What jumps out to you here in chapter 8 as the Lord, or as Solomon dedicates the temple?
Yeah, I love though that they are keeping up with like bringing the Levites, making sure that they are like here. Like first one thing we brought the elders, and listen, the Levites is there to do this. But then like I can't imagine how much livestock they brought.
Yeah.
Like the fact that it even says in verse 5 that it was like too many be counted, or like so many sheep and oxen that they could not be counted or numbered, which is crazy because when they plundered some stuff, they were able to tell us it was 300,000 sheep,
Yeah.
how much, and then like how much work that takes to sacrifice each and every one of them.
Yeah.
And they can't eat all that.
Yeah. No, that's a lot. I mean, I think it even tells us at some point, and I'm not seeing it right here, but I know there was like, it was so many that they couldn't even do it on like
inside,
right? They had to do it outside because it just couldn't fit in what they were trying to do it. So yeah, it's a lot for sure. But I mean, it's a whole assembly. We've talked about before how many Israelites there were. I think last time we had a census of short sorts, it was in the 600-ish thousands, but it's been generations since then. So
yeah,
assuming they've multiplied, well, that was actually the men that were measured. We felt like they were in the millions at that point, if you had children and women. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a multitude of people, right? It's a lot of people coming together to be at this dedication, essentially.
Yeah, and then for the Lord to show up himself too. Like in verse 11, or 10, that like the clouds filled it, like the priests could not even like stay in there to minister because the glory of the Lord filled the house. It was like you said, this is what God wanted. All these people that you're talking about to come and sacrifice and worship, and the Lord to come and be in the midst and dwell with them. Like this is what he's been striving for.
Yeah.
As much as they've turned their backs and gone other ways and done other things, like, yeah.
I mean, I love his prayer. I believe it's the same prayer that we come across in Second Chronicles 7, and which Chronicles kind of repeats what we learned in Samuel and Kings in a lot of ways, but just this, it's clear, he's asking for the Lord's favor kind of over the people, but he also just predicts the people are going to make a mistake.
Yes,
yes. And he says, God, but if you would you hear them when they turn, right? When they turn, like, would you please be there and hear them and forgive them, right? And I don't know, I love this. Like, this is looking at verse 31 here. Is like, a man sins against his neighbor and is forced to take an oath. He comes to take an oath before your altar in this temple. May you hear in heaven and act. Right? Then verse 33, when your people Israel are defeated before an enemy because they have sinned against you, they return to you and praise your name, and they pray and plead with you for mercy in this temple. May you hear in heaven and forgive for sin. Right? There's other ones where it's like, the sky's shut in, right? There's a famine. They're doing these things. If they're about to go to war and they pray in this direction, like, let this just be a place where that you will hear them, that you will dwell, and if they come to you, that you'll forgive them, you'll hear them, you'll give them direction and guidance, you'll give them peace. Like, can this just be that place and that space for you to dwell, but mostly for the purpose where the people can find you. Right? Like, that seemed to be the core of it for him in his prayer. It's like, let this temple be the place that people know that you are and that you dwell, and that should they come to find you and look for you, that they know they can find you here. For whatever it is that they need. And I love it. We'll get to the Lord's response tomorrow in chapter 9, but like, I don't know, I just love that heart posture of God. We just want to know where you are. We want to know where we can find you. When we come to pray and come to look, we just want to know where you are located, and know that we can count on you to be there.
Yeah. I love that you went through every one of those too, because he's like, These are signs I'm looking for in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So like, Lord, if I wronged you, because listen, the funds is low. Okay, the famine's real, right, or something like that. But I do love that. But another part in verse 41 that I liked was not only was he praying this prayer for the Jews, but for the Gentiles too.
Yeah,
like he included the foreigner, and I love that because it's something that was so misunderstood in the New Testament with the Jews later on, as if God was not for everyone.
Yeah.
And so here he says, like, when the foreigner who's not of your people comes from afar, like when he comes and prays towards this house, like, may you hear from heaven in your dwelling place and like do what the foreigner is calling to ask you for. Like, be here for them too. So I think it's one thing to pray for yourself, to pray for your own family.
Yeah.
It's another thing to pray for others, and others who might even be an enemy right now, right? And so I love this inclusiveness of like, this God is not just for us, your chosen people, but he's for the foreigner too.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of last thought here for me, before we, at least before I wrap up and my thoughts here today, I think what stands out to me, even as you bring that up, is it also makes sense to me now why the temple was always a target of attack for like the lands that would come to try to conquer.
Yeah,
right.
That's real.
Like, because one, this is the place that the Lord of Armies, as he's always often referred to, right? God is supposed to be located. The God of the Israelites is supposed to be located. But then when I also kind of keep in context that it is joined with the king's palace, right, and the armory, it's like, well, yeah, this is the place to go. Not only do we get the earthly physical king's location, but we get their heavenly king's location, like all in one spot.
And the riches.
And the riches, right? And the favor and all the things that come with it. And so, you know, we come to know, of course, God is not confined to that space, right? So despite the fact that, yes, you can come and destroy that all you want, you're not defeating anybody's God. You're not defeating Israel's God in that way. It was more symbolic than anything. But I get it now the more I read and have read kind of its dedication as well as the palace there. I'm like, okay, this is why. Because even as you said, for the foreigners, even everybody knows this is where Israel's God dwells.
Yeah.
Right? And this is where he's located.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Yeah.
All right.
You know, thoughts you had? No? Okay. Well, we will hear the Lord's response tomorrow. You know, a little bit of a cliffhanger here, but maybe see how the Lord responds. Does he say yes? Does he say no?
Yeah.
Who knows? Read on and figure out. But we'll pick up at chapter 9 tomorrow, hear his response, and hear a little bit more of Solomon's life. I think we conclude kind of Solomon's life by the end of tomorrow's reading. But yeah, until then, we appreciate you guys joining us and hope that you'll come back tomorrow, continue to read 1 Kings with us. But until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey